Alright friends, now that we've read the story, I ain't gonna paint no more. You are going to make your own paintings inspired by that project. You're going to be using a pencil for the first few steps, but I'm going to use a Sharpie so you can see. So we're going to hold our hand on our page so that it goes about, the top of my hand goes to about the middle of my page, because we have to save room at the top for our paintbrush. So using your pencil and holding your hand steady, you are going to go around your hand, place that pencil right up against your hand so it traces it exactly. This plumber should have took her ring off first. It's okay. We're just going to keep going. So notice how the edge of my pen marker is touching the edge of my hand, so I get a nice close trace. We want it nice and close. Okay, so there's that. Now we're going to do is add the details of our hand. And we want it to look like our hand is flipped over like this, so we can see all the paint we got all over our hand. Kind of funny how Miss Plummer has paint all over her hand. I was just painting, so it definitely is a book that I can relate to. Alright, so I'm going to flip my hand over, and I'm going to really pay attention to the lines in my hands. Okay, we're not going to draw any nails because I don't really see my nails if my hand is flipped over this way. So I'm looking at my hand, and I have this little curve that goes from this part of my hand all the way down to here. So I'm going to draw that curve. I have some wrinkles right around my wrist here, so I'm going to draw those. This is called observing the things in your environment. Okay, now I'm looking on each finger, and there's 3 lines. There's one where my fingers connect with my hand, so I'm going to just look and draw some of those. There's some middle lines, and then there's one up at the top. Alright, and then I have one that goes across here like this from the edge, the opposite side of my thumb. I have another guy. Alright, and there's even some on my thumb. And I can see maybe the side of my fingernail here. Okay, so there's the inside palm of my hand. We used our observation skills to draw that. We are now going to draw our paintbrush. So that's going to start with a curve that's very long. Okay, from that curve you're going to do a straight line, and then from here you're going to curve in the opposite direction to that line, and we're going to do a square coming off of that, and then we're going to do the brush part of our brush. So that's going to be another curve that comes from our square we made that kind of does a little bit of a loop up. And then on the other end, we're going to do another curve that meets with that one. I'm going to do just kind of like a waving line that connects from one side to the next, because that's going to be what my paint's hanging off of. You can do some little paint drops like this if you want. Alright, and I'm going to just do a curved line for the piece to separate the handle from the rest of the brush. So there's that, my friends. That's the drawing part. We're going to go in and add some blue shadows. Just like the artist, there were some blue shadows in his work. So to create shadows in our artwork, we need to figure out what side the sunlight's going to be on. So I'm going to pretend the sunlight's on the right-hand side of my drawing. I want to make sure that any shapes on the left-hand side have the shadows on them. So you're going to get a blue crayon. And I'm just going to go around the outer edge of my hand, pushing lightly with that blue crayon. I don't want to fill the whole hand in. I'm just doing the very left-hand side. And now I need that to match my paintbrush, because if the shadow's on the left-hand side of my hand, it needs to be on the left-hand side of my paintbrush. So I'm going to go ahead and also paint the very left-hand side of my paintbrush handle, but I'm not going all the way in. Alright friends, so that's about it for the shadows in the drawings today. Alright friends, so now that I have my project here, I'm going to start to add a wash of color onto my project. And with a wash, it's just a layer of paint we add before we add our darker values of color. So this has to be pretty light. So what we're going to do is what's called a wet on wet. And how I do a wet on wet is I wet the area that I'm going to paint first before I put the paint down. So I'm going to start in my hand, and it's okay if you go a little bit outside the lines, because I ain't going to paint no more, and it's supposed to look a little sloppy in some ways. So I just quickly added that. Another reason why I want to add the first layer of water very fast is because it's going to dry if I don't do it fast. So I'm going to pick a color of my choice, add some water, and I'm going to begin to paint on top. So every once in a while I'm going to add more water to that paint, going around. If for some reason your color's looking really dark, then what you can do is dip your brush in just water and spread it out with just water. What we do want to avoid is having any really dark colors and also any puddles forming on our paper. So we want to at the same time spread that color. We're now going to look on our color wheel and try to find analogous colors, and those are colors that are next to the color you're using on the color wheel. You're always going to have two colors next to the color you're using. Out of those two, you're going to pick which one you want to use. So if I'm looking at the color wheel next to yellow, green and orange will lay next to that color on the color wheel. I don't want to use both, I just want to pick one, and I'm going to do green. So now I'm going to go on top with a little bit of green in some areas, and because my paper's still wet from that first layer of color I had, that green is going to show up pretty light. We're going to get a nice blend of color. So I'm now going to do the same thing in my paintbrush. I'm going to add a layer of water first, and then I'm going to think about what color I want to use. You might have some of the color from the previous ones you used in your water. That's okay. We're just doing our best, friends. I'm going to go in with any color of my choice. For this, I'm going to choose red, and it'll be nice and light. I'm going to spread that out. You won't have to really dip your paintbrush in the paint as often because we're trying to get the color light. Okay, now I'm going to go in with a color that's next to red on the color wheel. I'm choosing purple, and I'm just going to, in a couple of areas, blend a little bit of that purple. So now that I have a wash in my hand and a wash on my paintbrush, we're going to let that dry until next time. And then next time we're going to be adding some details in our hand and in our paintbrush. Okay, so now that our first two layers are dry, we're going to do what's called a wet on dry. So you are going to be painting some designs and patterns in both your hand and your paintbrush. We're not mixing any colors today like we did last time. You're going to get your paintbrush and you're going to find the color you want to do. You want that brush to kind of hang out in your paints for a while because we're trying to create some dark values. Last time we wanted light values, this time we want dark. We're still keeping our bristles together when we move it around in the paint. We don't want to push really heavy. So notice how my bristles are staying together. I'm going to go in and think of a line that I want to repeat throughout both my hand and my paintbrush. So with that first color, and if it's not showing up, just wet your paint a little more. That first color, I'm going to do a purple line that's wavy. So keep in mind your undercoat is pretty dry, so you won't have any mixing of color, but sometimes the wet paint that you're using is going to pick up a little bit of the color, and if that happens, it's okay. So if your paint's not showing up enough, stick that brush in a little longer. All right, now I'm going to do some over my paintbrush as well. So I've got my wavy line. Now I'm going to go in with a different line in a different color. So maybe I want to do, I don't know, some zigzags. Ooh, that red is showing up really nice. So I'm going to keep going in both my hand and my paintbrush with zigzags. Don't want to go through the hand, so you're going to go inside of it. Stay out of the negative space. Okay, and I'm going to do one more line with one more color. maybe I want to do a dotted line. I'm trying to stay out of the wet lines that I just made. Sometimes it's a little tricky. The reason for that is I want to be able to keep those lines crisp and clear. If I go on top of them because they're still wet, they're going to end up blending the color that I have. And it's okay if you get a little bit like this outside of your objects because it is, I ain't going to paint no more. And it's supposed to be kind of messy. So now we're going to think of 2 lines that we want to do in the background. So, or a shape. You could also do a shape. So in mine, I'm going to do, I did some swirls. You can maybe do, I don't know, maybe I want to draw some shapes this time. Maybe I'll do some hearts. I'm being very gentle with that brush, keeping my bristles together. So I'm going in the background and I'm drawing some shapes. Making sure I'm not hearing any scratching. I'm spreading it out to fill up the space. Okay, so now that I have my shapes in there, I might want to go in and do some swirls or lines. So maybe I'll go in and do some swirls. So do either 2 lines or a line and a shape. Key thing that I'm looking for when you're working on your background is that you're working around the page to fill the space up. Okay, so now the last step is we're going to get a lot of a color on our brush. And with 2 colors, we're going to do splatter paint. So you're going to hold your fingers, 2 fingers up, brush on top very gently, hold it very close to the paper, but you do not want your bristles to actually touch the paper. You want it to be straight like this. Do not go like this. We're not slingshotting the paint across the room. We're going right against the paper, and you're going to just do a little splatter. Don't hit that brush too hard or it will get all over. We're just doing a little bit. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go into my color, clean it off, get a new color, and splatter with that second. So you all together will have 2 colors that you're going to splatter across your page. All right, friends, so as you can tell, like I say in art, nothing ever looks exactly like the original. This is my original, and this is the demonstration. Okay. Today we are going to be completing these, and we just want to make sure again that we're not blending any colors today, that we are just applying a wet on dry.